Now we are very pleased to welcome Alain Bresson for his communication, money supply and economic growth in Hellenistic Greece, Masse, monétaire et croissance économique dans la Grèce hellénistique. Merci beaucoup. Nous ferons les questions à l'issue de cette communication.
Tout d'abord, je voudrais remercier les organisateurs, Thibaut, Eneko et Marilou, qui malheureusement n'est pas avec nous ce matin, pour leur invitation. Et devant votre savante assemblée de proto-historiens, je suis un peu le Huron de la fable, parce que je ne suis pas archéologue, même si j'ai participé à des fouilles, bien sûr, et je ne suis pas non plus proto-historien. Donc voilà, un petit peu pour la mise en place. The organizers asked me to focus on the Hellenistic period, but they left me some freedom to organize my paper as I wished, and I felt that in order to have a fruitful dialogue with your community, I also needed to present an overview of the role of money in the pre-Hellenistic period before coming to the question of the Hellenistic period. This is why I will begin with some prolegomena about the question of money. To start with, maybe from electrum to gold, silver, and bronze coinage. By the last quarter of the 4th century BCE, just before the Hellenistic period, the Greek world had already been undergoing a major transformation of its monetary system for more than 2 centuries. We now know that the first coins were struck in Lydia and the cities of Western Asia Minor around 650 BCE. These coins were struck from electrum, an alloy of gold and silver. It has long been believed that the decision to strike electrum was made because the two metals were found as a natural alloy in Western Asia Minor. It was also believed that the composition of this natural alloy varied greatly. And some scholars thought that the first coins were struck to avoid, to bypass this variability. In this way, the states would have enforced the use of these coins regardless of their true metallic composition and value. But metal analysis of the Western coins of Asia Minor, in particular thanks to the work of our colleagues of the Centre Ernest Bablon in Orléans, has proven this conclusion wrong. In each series of electrum, in fact, each series of electrum has its own specific and consistent silver ratio, a result that implies that the composition of the alloy was deliberate. You see here, for instance, that for each type you have a certain definition of gold, a certain percentage of gold or silver. Is not at random at all. This result should not come as a surprise. A long-known monetary treaty between Phocaia and Mytilene, two cities of Western Asia Minor, probably dating from the end of the 5th century BCE, regulated the proportions of gold and silver in the electrum coins of the two cities. The two cities had their own types, but wanted to make sure that their coins had the same composition so that they could circulate together. In addition, a new edition of the text on a lead tablet discovered in the foundation of the late 7th century temple of Artemis at Ephesus, so really at the period when electrum coins were minted, brings further information. The text refers to the working together of the two precious metals in proportion of 57 gold and 43% silver. There is no indication that the process was intended to mint coins. It could have been for other purposes. But there seems to be no doubt that the mixture was used to make an electrum alloy. That the electrum coinage was made of natural electrum is now a theory that must be totally discarded. Besides, the electrum face of Greek coinage was longer than previously thought. It had been imagined that the this phase was very short, from around 580, 575 to about 550 BC, around 25 years. It's now clear that it lasted a century, between 650 and 550, which means that many more mints and more productive ones than previously thought existed. It's only under King Croesus, perhaps in the 550s, that the first separate gold and silver coins were struck. The color is not very clear. It's gold, actually, it should be more yellow. And this one is silver, Croesus. The first separated mint of minting process of gold and silver is under Croesus in the 550s BCE. This opened for new development. On the Greek mainland, it was probably not until before the 540s that cities began to mint their own coins. The first to mint was probably Aegina, followed by Eretria, Corinth, and Athens, although the exact chronology is not yet certain. You have here a few turtles of Aegina, was the most famous coinage of the time, and also, of course, an example of an early Athenian tetradrachm before the Persian Wars. Then, towards the end of the 6th century and the beginning of the 5th century, a large number of cities began to mint in a development that can be compared to a big bang. You see cities from Sicily up to Cyprus that minted silver coinage in this period. On the Greek mainland, the vast majority of cities minted only silver due to the rarity of gold and the abundance of silver in these regions, combined with the increasingly massive production of the silver mines of Laurion in Athens and the mines of Thrace and Macedonia in northern Greece from the last quarter of the 6th century BCE. In parallel, the production of coins became massive, with Athens becoming by far the largest coin producer in the Mediterranean in the classical period. A general observation regarding the production and use of coins is that it was a highly regulated process. This was true of minting, as we saw in the very first phase of coinage with the composition of the electrum alloy. But this characteristic is also seen in the very high quality of the silver of most coins, which were generally 99% pure, with only a very small percentage of copper added to increase the resistance of the metal. But this also applied to coin circulation. A number of laws and decrees from various cities testify that the circulation and use of coinage was under the control of the city. I will present here a small selection of them. A law of Eretria around 525 BCE required that payments to the city be made in money, kremata, and that is legal tender and of good quality. The law also refers to 10 staters, so probably we have here a case of a law that refers to coinage. In Athens, a law of 374 BCE details the process of controlling the coins circulating in Athens. During this period, Athens was flooded with imitation coins minted in Asia Minor, in the Levant, and in Egypt, and the quality of these imitations was uncertain. Their fineness was lower than that of the genuine Attic coins, which generally contain over 98% silver. Obviously, the Athenians lost confidence in their own coinage, and the law remedied the situation by controlling the coins in circulation with the aim of destroying the counterfeits and ensuring that the inferior imitations, these that you see on the screen, did not circulate at the same level as the authentic Attic coins. A third example, for Olbia in the Black Sea, apparently around 340-335 BCE, and inscriptions found at Yeron at the entrance of the Black Sea brings another example of this legislation. A law in the form of a decree provided for the free import and export of coined money, as well as the free negotiations and the absence of tax on coin exchange, except for the electrum coins of Cyzicus, which you see to the right on your screen, for which the exchange rate was fixed by the city. At the same time, it required that all transactions be made in the silver and bronze coins of the city, as you see now. Also, the city enforced the usage of its coins to exchange in the agora. The existence of this law shouldn't come as a surprise. The introduction of a legislation is a requirement for the usage of coins. And I think that, in fact, coinage is not a technical issue, or not a technical issue only. It's, first of all, an institution. So, originally, payments with coins were limited to amount of medium or high value. But starting in the mid-5th century BCE, with here an example from Turioi in Italy, bronze coinages of fiduciary value were introduced, which allowed even the smallest amounts to be paid with coins. So then it was again a big bang of bronze money, even much bigger than the silver coinage big bang. Even a small city could afford introducing bronze coinage. Most small-sized cities didn't have a silver coinage of their own, but increasingly more of them introduced a bronze one. But how did they manage with the silver coinage? Well, they gave legal tender to foreign coins that circulated in their regions. Another question is that of the famous case of Hague-Zilber. These observations invite a fundamental remark about the use of coins in the Greek world. In the classical period, payment with coins became the standard form of payment, as I mentioned, as with the case of Olbia. In this respect, the Greek world embarked on a path that separated it from the societies of the Eastern Mediterranean, such as Egypt, Mesopotamia, or Iran, where, until the arrival of Alexander, the standard form of payment was in weighed raw silver. An example from the Levant here. In Mesopotamia, the history of monetary payment with chunks of raw silver, which modern specialists define as Hague-Zilber, dates back at least to the early 2nd millennium BCE, if not before. It was widely used in Mesopotamia, the Levant, in the Iron Age. But did it make a difference whether one paid with raw silver or with a coin? After all, in both cases, a certain amount of silver is involved, and it doesn't seem to matter at all whether the lump of metal has received a mark, a sema, from the city or from some other authority, such as a king or dynast. Technically, the statement is correct. It doesn't matter. But in practice, it's not. The exchange of a chunk of silver left uncertainty about the actual value of the metal. In the Eastern Mediterranean, we have several cases in the written documentation from the late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, where the quality of the metal used in an exchange was a matter of dispute. In each case, also, the weight of the lump of metal had to be adjusted to make sure that it had the right weight for the exchange. The trick of the ancient Greek coinage system, and the fundamental reason for its success, is that it combined the guaranteed fineness of the metal with the social use of the coin enforced by the state. The use of weighed silver meant that the transaction remained purely private, without the guarantee of the state, whereas with a coin you have a public transaction with the guarantee of the state. This was the case with the Achaemenid Empire. And following the tradition of Croesus, the Achaemenid kings minted gold coins in the western part of their empire, gold darics here and silver sigloi. But in most regions of the Achaemenid kingdom, such as Mesopotamia, people remain in a weighed silver system until Alexander, and even beyond after the conquest of Alexander. The state didn't take over the monetary instruments, which remained purely private. Thus, the Achaemenid kings also had no interest in introducing and administering coinage in their empire's heartland. What they did do, however, like their Syrian and Babylonian predecessors, was to accumulate vast reserves of gold and silver in their treasuries in their Iranian capitals. So, based on Herodotus' descriptions, who mentions huge accumulations of silver in the treasuries of the great king here. Herodotus tells us that it was almost 15,000 talents of silver equivalent accumulated each year in the hoards and the treasuries of the great king. But for many reasons I cannot explain here in detail, these numbers, these amounts are not complete fantasy, but they cannot be trusted at all. These numbers are absolutely far too high. And there is consensus more or less now about that. But what we can do, however, have a different approach. We can, for good, tabulate what we get from literary sources about the resources of Darius III at the time of Alexander's conquest. And one arrives at a total of around 270,000 talents in silver equivalent, or 7,000 tons of silver equivalent. You don't need 15,000 talents per year to get this result. With a little over 1,000 talents per year, you can accumulate over 200 years the gigantic amount of almost 275,000 talents in total. In a paper published in 2020, science goes very fast in our time, I hypothesized that most of the silver accumulated by the Achaemenid kings must have come from Laurion through trade and taxes levied by the Achaemenids. Well, in 2022, the hypothesis of a Laurian origin, and in part also Northern Greek origin, was confirmed by a study published by colleagues Blichethoft, Albared, and other colleagues, which we provided a metal analysis of Alexander silver coins minted in the East immediately after the conquest from metal looted by Alexander. So we have the proof that the vast quantity of Alexander minted after Alexander's conquest were in fact minted from silver and gold, for the gold, accumulated by the Achaemenids. So there is no reason to doubt about the reality of the accumulation of Achaemenid treasuries. But we know also that this silver came, as for the silver, came from Greece through trade. So the great kings did not mint this metal, but in the end, a large part of it was actually minted by Alexander and his successors. Now, money supplies and economic growth in early Hellenistic Greek. Well, it seems to be a very difficult task. We have no information really on the GDP of the Hellenistic world. We have no detail about, in fact, the detail of the money supply. So this seems to be an unattainable goal for now. But despite this over-ambitious title, the aim of my research, my point today, is more modest. In the absence of the detail for GDP and for monetary production, I will use various data series as proxies to propose a model of the link between the money supply and the evolution as of economic activity, which economists define as growth. Please note that this is only there is already an ongoing debate on these questions, and I am not the first one to venture on this territory. We have, in fact, two models of the role of money in the ancient world. To say the least, there is no consensus between specialists. For some scholars, especially scholars working on the Western Asia, Michael Jossa, Robert van der Spek, Bas van Leuven, Einhard Pengruber, and also Sita van Reden, we are in a world of deep monetization. Deep monetization it means that money penetrated deeply in the economy of the cities, and also that this was fundamentally, this world, especially Mesopotamia, was a world where market organization played a fundamental role, and market structures were the same nature of as those we have in the Greek Mediterranean. The only difference between the two worlds would be that in the East, people used Hacksilber, raw weighed money, and in the West, coins. This is the, although they do not elaborate on this point, they also, these specialists also imply that an increase in the money supply could stimulate economic activity. A rise in prices in Babylonia in the late 6th century and early 5th century is associated with an increase in the money supply, which in turn is associated with an economic boom. A radically different view is proposed by François de Calatayud and other specialists of the Western economies. François de Calatayud argues that the many mentions of quantities of silver or in our sources for Mesopotamia do not correspond to physical transfer. It's only paper money, if you like. More fundamentally, de Calatayud questions the notion of deep monetization for Western Asia before and after the conquest. And for him, until the end of the Hellenistic period, the majority of exchanges in this region corresponded to transfers in kind, not in money. On the Mediterranean side of the classical Hellenistic economy, de Calatayud acknowledges the increasingly important presence of coins, although the ratio of coins per inhabitant remained low. So we have a model of low monetizations, if you like. Some observations on these issues. In Mesopotamia, indeed, there was a market, but because of the tributes in kind due to the tributes in kind and the rents in kind, also due to temples, the role of the market was mainly to convert revenues in kind into revenues in cash. It was, in some way, a vertical organization of the market. But on the other hand, the notion that coinage or silver in general did not circulate cannot be accepted for many reasons. The proof is that the very inflation we have in the late 6th century BCE, this inflation is not possible if money did not circulate, of course. So we have no reason to doubt that Hacksilber circulated. The work of our colleague Elon Heymans has proved that, in fact, the Hacksilber showed traces of circulation. And also, there is a fundamental article, recent article by Frédéric Duras about money in southern Trans-Euphrates, so which is in the Levant today, into region Idumea and Samaria. And here you see that the detail of circulation of in Idumea from Ostraka mainly, we see that most transactions were in kind. It's dockets delivery of grain. almost no mention of silver transactions. In Samaria, from papyri of the 4th century, it's a different approach. We have in Samaria many mentions of silver used in a city that minted silver itself in this region. So it perfectly combines, if I dare say, the two approaches which I referred to previously, the role of deliveries in kind to Achaemenid treasuries, but also the presence already of silver. And a beautiful case is the excavation performed in Khirbet Kiyafa. In these cities, you have a mix of silver coins and Hag's silver. So my conclusion on the debate is that the two sides that I referred to have their good and their weak points. Well, just a short note on the great kings minted gold and silver only in the West, but it's only after Alexander that the big mass of these coins were actually minted. An example of Alexander coinage in gold. Before, the Greeks almost never minted gold. And one of the most famous coins of the ancient world, a famous Alexander with the head of Heracles on the obverse. So this was a gigantic emission of silver and gold. For gold only, you have here a total of over 1,500 equivalent of die per stater for this very short period of about 35 years at most. So it's a huge, brutal increase of the money supply in a very short period of time. But what was this metal used for? What for? Well, again, a view of François de Calatayud is very important in this. Mainly, it was, according to him, for non-productive use. Well, he tabulated what we find in the plays of the Attic comedy through Plautus and Terence, and you see people used this money. It was soldiers received the pay. They used this money to hire courtesans, for jewels, for good food, etc., etc. The consequence of that, according to him, is that there was no economic growth. And besides, gold and silver quickly left the Hellenistic world because many people who were paid were, in fact, Thracian mercenaries, and the gold left for Thrace. So he compares the situation of the Greek world with the situation of Spain in the 16th century, where gold and silver goes through very quickly but doesn't have a real economic impact. Besides, there is no doubt that this was a period of inflation. Following the conquest, we have a big inflation in Greece. Unfortunately, because of state of the sources, the case of Delos shows us only the end of the period, not the full period of inflation. You see the decrease of prices in Delos after 300 BCE. But it's more interesting to see what happens in Babylon. We have the curve over 500 years of the curve of the price of barley. And you see at the period around 300, a huge inflation following Alexander's conquest. There's no doubt this is a period of inflation. And why was there inflation? Well, the logic is that because the supply was inelastic, you have a demand that appears brutally with money. But if the real economy does not meet this demand, what happens is inflation, no doubt. This is what we observe. So it seems to be, we seem to be very happy. There was no economic growth. It's more complicated, however, for many reasons. Alexander's money means also big wars, more big wars. And especially, for instance, I take only not the land battles, but the sea battles. Much bigger ships. Before, the standard ship, as you know well, was a trireme. But now we have very big ships, the 6s up to the 16s. Huge ships with a trireme and a crew of about 200 people, a 6 only as a crew of 500. So it meant also heavier costs for shipbuildings, fittings, etc. Bigger ships, but also more battles and bigger battles. I'll tabulate here a few of the biggest battles of the 4th century, sea battles. In the beginning of the 4th century, Cnidos, Embata, very large number of ships, 180, 220 ships. But at the end of the 4th century, Battle of Amorgos, 480 ships. Battle of Salamis, 380 ships. Demetrius the Poliorcetes wanted to build a fleet of 500 ships. Alexander, before his death, wanted to build a fleet of 700 ships, etc., etc. So more battles, bigger ships, and the costs were immense. The Amorgos campaign probably cost, only for the Athenian side, around 780 talents. But what did the people do? The rowers, the carpenters, all the craftsmen, what did they do? The land army soldiers, of course. These people who received the money wanted to use this money. And this money, even if it represented only a fraction of the money that the kings received, well, they spent the money immediately. We understand how this money came into circulation. And here we have the vicious circle of war, not the virtuous circle, but the vicious circle of war. The war industry needed more iron, more bronze, more sails, more ropes, etc. And we have examples of new production to meet this demand. I will show this in a minute. So the war industry employed a significant workforce in the city. And what did result, for instance, this is a ram at the upper part, a ram of the early 4th century, around 200 kilos, but a ram of the Hellenistic period, 465 kilos, twice bigger. Luxury investment. Well, in fact, a good example is the case of Demetrius of Phalerum, the dictator of Athens at the end of the 4th century. What did he do? He bought, in fact, a slave, a cook, the best cook and dinner organizer of the time. And this guy managed to enrich himself. Moschyon was able to buy 3 synoikiai. What is a synoikia? In fact, it's a rental building. So even an expenditure for luxury was turned into the real world, real economy. Loans, people could loan money. I'll go very quickly on this. This was a period of new construction, very intense construction in 3 regions, for instance, Troas, Ionia, Coria. Huge cities built in this period, example, Notion in Ionia, Heraclea Latmos, a huge wall circuit built in Coria in this period, in these only examples. But this was also translated into real economy. 3 farms of northern Greece, excavated by our Greek colleagues. Komboloi, Tria Platania, Liotopi, Ruceli. We are the heartland. We are really in the heartland of Macedonia. And we have farms of unprecedented size. For instance, the farm of Komboloi at the foot of Mount Olympus. It's a little fabric, if you like. It never existed before. What did they produce? Well, wine, amphorae, and we know that, of course, mercenaries like to drink wine. Liotopi Ruceli, a farm, but also a farm that produced metal that could be used for the sea battles or for the land battles. My last case is the case of the amphora in Thassos. Thassos had been known for many years, in fact centuries, for producing wine. And if we tabulate the number of fabricants per year for the amphorae of Thassos, we see there is a bulge around 300 BCE. And then it decreases, but we have definitely a bulge. So to say that my conclusion will be, did this brutal invasion of gold and silver following Alexander's conquest, did it have an impact? Well, the supply couldn't meet the huge demand at the level it was, certainly not. But there was indeed a real impact to some extent in the real economy. And this is what I tried to show you. Thank you for your attention.